How often do you think about space? Probably not enough, considering how much we use it every day. We rely on the thousands of satellites up there to keep our modern lives running smoothly. But there's an explosive threat on the horizon: space junk. Satellites up in space beam TV signals and phone calls around the world. They facilitate Google Maps, GPS, and the internet, bank transactions, the stock market, disaster planning, military surveillance, and air traffic control. They help predict weather patterns and crop farming. They provide data on the oceans, outer space, and global warming. And that's just a few examples. In the race to set up satellites, no one was thinking about future sustainability up in space. So how much junk have we put into orbit, and how are we going to clean it up? It's tempting to see our space environment as this romanticized floating paradise filled with nothing. But actually, lower Earth orbit has never been more crowded. 2022 broke all records for space launches, with more than 2,000 spacecraft going into orbit. But it's not just functioning useful tech up there. Thousands of dead and broken satellites, old rocket parts, and general bits of man-made space debris are flying around the Earth at high speed too. And the threat of collisions is becoming a huge problem. With orbiting speeds of up to 28,000 kilometers an hour, one tiny screw colliding with a spacecraft can have the impact of a hand grenade. We've been launching satellites since the 1950s with no plan or system for cleaning anything up. Because surely the great thing about space is there's so much space? We'll fast forward to today with more than 90 countries operating up there and an estimated 17,000 new satellites set to be launched by 2030, and we could be on course to creating a super junk space highway. The good news is there are some big tech players working to make our space race more sustainable. Former Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak heads a company called Privateer. The company is tracking over 27,000 larger pieces of space debris in real time to try and stop explosive collisions from happening. Their rivals, LEO Labs, which provides a similar debris tracking service, say they're sending out more than 400 million collision alerts to satellites every month. But it's not an ideal fix. There are hundreds of millions of space junk pieces whizzing around that are too small to track. Also, maneuvering your satellite to avoid a collision costs thousands of dollars each time. What about if we drastically reduce the number of satellite launches going on? Unfortunately, that's not a quick fix either, because every collision in lower Earth orbit generates a brand new cloud of debris, causing even more collisions and eventually a cascading ricochet effect known as the Kessler Syndrome, and we definitely want to avoid that. Imogen Napper and her team at Portsmouth University have been comparing space debris to plastic trash in the ocean. To physically clean up a piece of space junk, it has to be deorbited, which means grabbing it and pushing it down into the Earth's atmosphere, where it mostly burns up upon re-entry, like a shooting star. As you can imagine, that's not a cheap operation. The European Space Agency's first actual removal mission will be launched in 2025 by a Swiss startup called ClearSpace. Their first challenge will be launching into the right bit of space to catch the piece of debris rather than just colliding with it. We have to rendezvous with the subject at 28,000 kilometers per hour, allow our speed with the subject, and then capture it in an environment where there's no friction. Japan-based startup Astroscale is hoping to cut costs by considering the cleanup process right from the start. U.S. authorities recently brought in a new 5-year rule for satellites to be deorbited after completing their missions, but space guidelines are hard to enforce. Destroying unwanted or defunct satellites with ground missiles has also been an environmental disaster for lower Earth orbit. There have been demonstrations or tests made by the U.S. in the early stages, then by China, then by India, and lately by Russia. The impact of those weapons on the space environment is worse than the loss of the satellite itself. With the number of satellites in orbit set to increase fourfold by 2030, the risk posed by space junk is increasing rapidly. So if we want to maintain our connected world as we know it, governments, businesses, and scientists will need to seriously rethink how we treat our space environment.